Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Hi, Maricella.
Hey, Kristy. How's everything going?
Things are going. This is the day and age and power of technology. I'm sitting here watching on my phone as my son has a middle school baseball game, and the day and age of peeping Toms, because I'm also sitting here looking out my window at my elderly neighbor on a ladder cutting down trees, and I may have to run over there and offer to do it for him. Yeah. I mean, it's like, we just so connected to life in many different ways after the past few years.
Yeah, I am sitting in a corner in my apartment looking straight at two monitors, so I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I forget, maybe I'm thinking of the giving tree, but when I look out my window, there's a tree in my backyard, and so I've seen it now through 2 seasons of, losing its leaves and then buds starting to come back and then in full bloom and then, losing them again. And it reminds me, I believe it's the giving tree of you see it throughout the seasons. And, the significance and meaning of the tree within the book. And here this tree is giving me some comfort, absolutely, of just seeing life and reemergence of nature and life. And there's a season for everything.
There is a season for everything. And I think, so here I go with my ridiculous insights, but it's April. Apparently it's a season of change. We're in spring. An eclipse season also starts. So maybe it's time for us to really take that to heart and make sure that we are changing, evolving, both in our personal lives, in what we want to do as humans, and in general. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about that lately.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that many are thinking about that. It's felt the past couple years, which I could just talk about ad nauseum maybe, because it's still top of mind. I'm still coming out of this pandemic, but it's felt like we were just reacting to what was happening in the world and so many unknowns and uncertainty. And now we're in a place of being more proactive, and taking stock of where we are and where we want to be and how do we get there.
Yeah. I think for me, it's also age. I just feel like I'm going there into a midlife crisis, but it hasn't happened yet while we're recording this, but it will have happened by the time this this episode comes out. But I'm having my 10-year reunion from graduating business school, and that's kind of also making me think about what I've done with the last 10 years of my life. So I think there's many aspects that, like you said, globally or collectively, we've all gone through a lot in the last 3 years, and we're being able to breathe. And then I think there are certain markers in your life that make it very prime time for questioning. And I think I'm facing one of those. So I think it's a mix.
Yeah, I can understand that. And all these milestones, I think, do make us take stock of things. And I mean, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a big milestone, but this is certainly a time where many of us are just asking ourselves, where are we going? And I'll say, I mean, it's not quite the same as you, Maricella, and by the time this airs, I will have gone, but I haven't gone yet. I'm going to New Orleans for the NCAA Final Four championships with my alma mater, Villanova. And it's been 23 years, I want to say, since I graduated. So that's going to be interesting to see everyone. I don't know who's going to be there, but I'm sure there'll be people I know.
That's exciting, though. That will be a fun trip.
Time goes by quite fast.
You know what didn't go by fast?
What?
The first 139 years that the federal courts existed and were presided exclusively by white men.
What a transition, Maricella.
I was looking at it and I'm like, well, yeah, that did not go. That is
Smooth.
a long time. We're talking about 10 years, 20 years.
Well, Maricella, yes, we are coming off of recent confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, and it's certainly, I mean, there's much there to give us pause. Obviously, just the historic nature of the fact that we've gone through for 140 years where the courts were presided over by exclusively white men. Judge Katanji Brown Jackson would be the first Black woman to be on the Supreme Court. It's 2022. That is way too long to wait for that. And just, what she experienced during the confirmation hearings, everything from, racism to, silencing of her voice. And I think it's reflective. You and I talked last week a bit about the behaviors and a lot of the norms that particularly impact women of color, and this was no different. And so, the more we talk about it and say it's not okay, and we want change, and we want representation on all levels of government and society, the more we can collectively advocate for that and see it happen.
Yeah, I did not see enough of the confirmations. I mostly kind of saw highlights. I think she was asked a lot of questions that would not have been asked if she wasn't a Black woman, which is what you're saying, right? Like there's always bias that shows in some way or another, and that it's a first we can celebrate in our history maker section.
Yes, we can. And something else that I just, as a parent, that I wanted to mention is it was really cool because my kids came home from school and they were talking about this in school and the significance of her confirmation and the history of the Supreme Court and the representation on the Supreme Court. And as a parent that my kids are talking, and I mentioned this too because I know there's a lot that's been happening in our country around education, around sexual orientation, around race. But to know that they're talking about a Supreme Court nominee, they're talking about the fact that she would be the first Black woman. They talked about the other women on the Supreme Court. They talked about RBG and Sandra Day O'Connor and Sotomayor, and so it was just good that this isn't being glossed over.
I love that. I really, really love that. And like you mentioned, at a time where in many other places, I know your kids are Brooklyn based, but in many other places, there are being some attacks to what can be presented in school and what topics can be discussed. In fact, this is one of the topics we're going to be discussing at Mobilize Women. So quick plug there. But as you know, we do our annual Mobilize Women Summit, and this will be happening online on June 8th. And one of the topics that we'll cover is gender minorities and changes in the law. And so we pay attention to a lot of the big picture stuff, or federal law, or things that are happening here. And I say we, as if I'm an American, I'm not, but still I live here, so I do pay attention. But sometimes some others can kind of float under the radar, or can be less, they're statewide, so they're, I don't know, less loud. But we know that in the last few years, there's been quite a bit of an attack on reproductive rights, on transgender population and their liberties, and also on what's being taught in school, and also voting rights. I could talk about this for ages. So I'm curating this panel, which is, I'm super excited. We have really, really great speakers already. We're going to have Julia B. Chan, who's the editor-in-chief of the 19th. If you don't follow the 19th, I suggest you do. We're going to have Fatima Graves, who's the president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, and Dr. Nicole Mason, who's president and chief executive officer of the Institute for Women's Research. And I may have a couple of other people for that same topic that I am very excited about, but I am not going to disclose because I need to finalize their confirmation as speakers.
All right. Well, and our guest today, Simmone Taitt, and I talked about a similar theme in our conversation. Simone is the CEO of Poppy Seed Health, an app that transforms care for pregnant and postpartum people with on-demand 24/7 access to midwives, doulas, and nurses. And in our conversation, Simone and I talked about everything from health education, particularly in school. We talked about the support within the healthcare system that women, and particularly women of color, are lacking in that support. We normalized a lot of what happens around fertility and that conversation, and there's a lot there. And
Sorry, I'm laughing to myself because you're like the support that women of color, and I wanted to burst in being like, what support? Because it's not existent really, as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I mean there's tons of research out there,
Right.
around maternal death rates for Black women, medical
Mm-hmm.
support, and beyond maternal as well. I mean, it's a systemic problem, across the board. But
Yeah.
with Simone and I, it was a great conversation, and I applaud the work that she does. It's very necessary, and when we see innovation filling the gaps that exist within our social structures and healthcare and education, and how do we do better and do better by being the solution.
I can't wait to hear this.
All right, well, let's get to my conversation with Simone. Hello, Simone, and welcome to the Ellevate podcast.
Hi, Kristy. Thanks so much for having me.
I am very much looking forward to this conversation. I think it's an important one to have about women and health and so much around, what society tells us about it and what the reality is. And so let's get started. Simone, would you share with our listeners today a bit about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I think the easiest way to jump into my background is to probably start with where I grew up. I promise I won't keep us in my childhood for too long, but I am the last of three, the only one born here. So my family immigrated to the US more than 40 plus years ago at this point. And I was born and raised in Massachusetts. So I have pretty deep New England roots. I was a pretty precarious kid. I was very curious about everything around me. And I was not a shy kid. I think that has probably stayed with me throughout my life. But one of the things that I was always very interested in, even as a young girl, was the wonders of pregnancy. And that really followed me. I actually went to college as a pre med student. I thought that somewhere along my line, I wanted to be in OBGYN. And like so many students, that can't really pass microbiology and these chemistry courses. That dream was soon not aligned, and I think actually put me in a much better trajectory out of pre med, and really into the work of helping people. And for me, that I think proliferated in very different ways. I actually went to my first tech company, about 14 or 15 years ago, before it was even cool to do so. I left a Fortune 500 company for, a really scrappy 30-person tech startup in New York City. And I really got bit by building things. And that was kind of the beginning of my obsession with building tech products and building things for people that really help to solve something for in their lives, whether it was, from their, wellness decisions to travel to their wardrobes to their front door to the rise of, disruptors in the on-demand space. And so, I cut my teeth at some of these very now well-known tech startups like Guilt Group and Spa Booker, but back then, they were really small companies, and I'm a builder, really by heart and by training, and so that's a bit of my background, and I guess eventually leading me into starting my own startup with Poppy Seed Health. So I guess it's not surprising for people, but for me, it is surprising that I'm now a founder.
Yeah, I mean, being a founder it's a risk, right? And I think many of us are risk averse in ways where, and I have a similar story to yours where I started out in investment banking and then went and worked at startups. And when you're part of the team, it feels, a little bit safer, if you will. And then, but there's something about really owning that passion and that work and being the person to drive that vision. And that's exciting and meaningful. So what was that journey for you to say, okay, I want to start my own company? And how did you align with the purpose of that company?
Totally, Kristy. I couldn't agree with you more. I think what really drove me, what I loved, what I still love about startups in these early stages is that you have real autonomy and ownership over the business. But I was always on the other side of that. So even though I was in the first, typically 20 employees with a company, I was very happy with founders taking on the risk, and so that I would get, a better sleep at night. But I think like so many founders, especially women, we experience things in our own lives, our own lived experiences that drive us to start something, drive us to change something that has happened. And that's very true for me and Poppy Seed Health. So I'll take you back to 2016 when I had my first pregnancy loss. I've had many pregnancy losses actually over the last few years on a very complicated journey to parenthood. But it was that very first one in 2016. I want you to imagine first thing in the morning, of course, when so many of us have our own personal appointments before work. So I was the first appointment in, I was in my first trimester. It was my second visit. And unfortunately, we couldn't find a heartbeat. And although I was seeing one of the top OBGYNs in New York City at the time, I actually was shocked and stunned at the lack of care and comfort that I received in those moments. And the conversation went something like this: we can't find a heartbeat. Looks like your body terminated the pregnancy, which was for me just a dagger through the heart. And then, of course, I started to think, oh my God, what's wrong with my body? And then she said, but it's fine. It's normal. This happens all the time. I'll see you in a few months when you start trying again. And she left the room. And that was it. It was no more than, 15 minutes or so. And as I gathered my things, got dressed, I was emotionally distraught, as you can imagine. The ugly cry, everything, but I was also in a state of denial. I was, really in shock. I had come in pregnant and here I was leaving not pregnant. And on my way out, I asked the staff if there was anything that I needed. And they said, no, we'll see you on your next visit. And that was it. So I left that appointment with no medical, mental, or emotional health resources. And I think that's really always shocking for people to hear, but it is so unfortunate in the truth that this happens all the time. Um, so I was standing in the streets trying to figure out what to do next. Do I go into my workplace? Do I not? No one knew that I was pregnant, right? Culturally speaking, we just don't tell people when we're early in pregnancy, when really that's when we need people the most. And we need support the most. And I took to the internet and I found very coincidentally what I was looking for just within a few minutes. Simple blood work and a sonogram really to show that everything had passed and I could have um, healthy subsequent pregnancies. Neither of those things were offered to me, so I picked up the phone. I called my own care plan into my doctor's office, and instead of feeling this sense of relief, I actually felt enraged and upset and confused. And I know now what I didn't know then, which is women who look like just like me. I'm a Black and South Asian woman. There is strong racial bias that's in our healthcare system. I had no idea what that looks like then. But then the second thing was that there is absolutely no point for emotional and mental health support as you're going through, the trying to conceive journey, your pregnancy, postpartum, and especially when it comes to pregnancy loss. And I felt really strongly like I needed to change that and I needed to change it immediately. One last point of this story, which, I used to be kind of ashamed to share, but I share it all the time now because I know I'm not alone here. I actually spent the entire day on the internet, right? I spent the entire day just searching for um, a place where I felt like I could be seen and supported. And I didn't quite know what I was looking for, but I did know that I was looking to feel better. And that's a very universal experience. It wasn't until that evening when I was sitting on my couch by myself at home, I actually stumbled onto a doula thread, and they were, responding to someone who had gone through a pregnancy loss. And for the first time all day, I felt seen, I felt heard, I didn't feel so isolated. And that was just me reading through this thread. And I actually started to feel better. And that's when I knew it was the emotional solvency that was missing from that, 12-hour period from finding out that I wasn't pregnant to that moment that was so powerful for me. And I sat back on my couch and I, made two very important decisions that night. The first one was to become a doula myself, which I did, and I am. And the second one was this concept for poppy seed health. Didn't have a name, but it was very clear that within just a few seconds, people like me should be able to connect with a doula, midwife, or nurse who can meet them where they are with their emotional and mental health support through pregnancy, postpartum, and loss.
Well, thank you, Simmone, for the work that you do. And it's clear, that you're really passionate about this, but that it is necessary. And I thank you for sharing your story. I think, no matter how much time passes, it never gets easier, but there's something about, and I also had a pregnancy loss, and as you're telling your story, I think there's something about it where it is such a traumatic and hard time for us individually, that we don't always talk about that externally and with others, and that's understandable. But it's then the lack of the transparency and talking about it that serves to not support the next person, it happens to, right? Because we're not having a conversation, and this is what I learned, and this is, that others can one, feel less alone, but also not have to go through the depths of research and self-advocacy that you went through. And it just goes to show why, the company you've created is needed, so that the weight of this work isn't on the shoulders of those who have suffered this traumatic time. You're taking that weight on your own shoulders and creating something that benefits, many. And just, thank you. I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you so much, Kristy. Yeah, and I think, and thank you for sharing about your loss as well. And I don't know about you, but I can definitely say that whenever I've shared my story, which is now very public, and such a deep part of poppy seed health, we really believe that technology can help close these gaps that we have for folks who aren't who are, wherever they are, right? They could be sitting on their couch, they could be at their doctor's office, they could just be in their commute. When it comes to grief and loss, that can hit you at any time. You could be at your desk in the workplace, right? But one thing that's very clear to me is that in sharing my story, I receive so many stories back. And we just don't have the structure in the US healthcare system that can support people between their doctor's appointments when they are experiencing acute need. And we stand really boldly that your mental health and your emotional health support is a part of healthcare. And so in the maternal healthcare journey, we just don't have any points where you're seeing your primary provider, and then you also have that emotional and mental health support as a part of your holistic care, right? So we feel really strongly that that is something that was missing, and we built Poppy Seed Health to really close those gaps for folks.
Yeah. And when you think about this, the whole spectrum, if you will, and I may be way oversimplifying this, so hold me accountable for that. But I'm thinking of my own education and journey, right? So you learn somewhat about women's health in school as you're growing up, which led to a lot of confusion when I was trying to get pregnant and didn't realize why it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, and had to really then understand like ovulation and cycles and my body and what, and how to better learn about my body. But so, you have that early education. We have maybe annual doctor visits, assuming that, there's no ailments or other things that you're struggling with. But, and yeah, and then you are creating a life, and you hope and hopefully bringing it into this world. And yeah, it's, once a month you have a 20-minute visit, and in between those gaps, you're what Google is maybe your answer, and that's a scary place to be in when you're talking about your own health, or maybe it's your community, sharing with friends or family. But there's just a lot of gaps there, and I personally experienced that myself. My first birth ended up being a C-section. And there was a lot of things in hindsight I would have done differently had I have known to ask those questions, or I had someone with the knowledge to advocate on my behalf. And I went with a doula for both of my second and my third births, and it was a completely different experience, because the fact that you don't know everything doesn't then feel like a detriment, because you have someone in your corner who does know, who will advocate for you, who's always there to answer your text or your question, can really provide that type of support and advice, and better prepare you for this process and during it. And it's just part of our US based healthcare system that is lacking, because this is very common elsewhere. And we need progress, and we particularly need progress around women's health. And we need transparency, we need support, and we need to look at this more, in a more proactive lens. And yeah, so I'm sharing my story to just validate, as a customer, that what you do matters, and there's a need. And again, back to that big picture of health in the US, and particularly women's health, there's a lot of gaps to be filled.
Oh, totally. I love that you and I have the same thought process as it relates to early education around sex, period, right? I often say that the our first in our school system anyway in the US is sex ed, and the story goes something like this. You have sex, sperm and egg meet, you get pregnant, ta-da, that's it, right? Like, surprise, you have a baby. And that's just, there's so much more education that needs to be had there. But even beyond that, it is not easy for many people to get pregnant when the time comes. We're taught a lot of prevention In the US, we're not necessarily taught our own cycles or, what it means to start a trying to conceive journey when you're ready to start your family. And in addition to that, by the way, all of these little questions that we have along the way, we also have a lot of shame and stigma. It can feel very lonely, very isolating. So at Poppy, it's so important to us that you actually show up to ask us all of those things or to say to us all of those things that I always say you can't say out there, you can say at Poppy, right? So, for example, one of our top categories, believe it or not, are birthing people in their third trimester who have hemorrhoids. No one told them that they would get hemorrhoids third trimester, almost ready to have the baby. They feel so ashamed. They're in a lot of discomfort, and we get questions all the time. And the great thing about coming to Poppy and what my bigger vision has always been is that to be able to meet someone and say to them on our app and like we're right in your pocket for you to be able to come to us and talk to us about your hemorrhoids, we love it. We're able to comfort you in those moments, but we're also going to tell you to go sit in a sitz bath. We're going to tell you to take care of yourself and all these holistic self-care things that you can do to not just feel better about yourself and where you are in your journey, but these practical tips and tricks that are also really important. And all of that is so important to your emotional and mental health support, right? And so, like, that's a very practical example that I just gave. But our number one category of why people come to Poppy are around anxiety related questions as it relates to their own journey to labor and delivery. Our family structure, the modern family and the family structure, is so diverse now that it's really important that people feel like they are connecting with someone who has either similar lived experiences or at least know what the heck is going on to give them some direction, right? It's one of the reasons why we know at Poppy, we have people who come to us who are, living in mansions in Beverly Hills, and we also support people who are receiving their care on Medicaid. And our advocate network, our doulas, midwives, and nurses are not only diverse in their lived experience, but also in their own experiences and their own expertise. So that's really important to us at Poppy. And I think it doesn't matter who you are, stigma and shame and having somewhere to go to ask these questions while you're on your pregnancy, postpartum, or loss journey is so important.
What's been the hardest thing about building this business?
I'm a woman building a health tech company. I'm a Black woman building a health tech company. And all of the data and stats say that the entire world is built against founders like me being successful. I have found that most people underestimate the power of Poppy, and most people are underestimating me. And I actually use that as jet fuel for my rocket. So the hardest thing is I show up in the world proudly myself, but that doesn't mean that, building a healthcare and a health tech startup is, easy to begin with. And I have some of these other barriers right in front of me. And if I may, I will say also the second hardest thing is that I am still shocked to learn how much we just don't take care of our families in the US in the ways that other countries do in a really holistic, supported way. I think, especially during pregnancy, the outcome of pregnancy is, oh, you're pregnant, you get to go to your appointments every month, and that's it. There's no in between. Usually, after you have a baby, whether it doesn't matter how you have the baby, you're not staying in the hospital typically for more than 3 days, and then you're sent home with nothing, right? And so it's so important to us that we're leveraging technology to bring those gaps together. But there is a much bigger play here and vision for poppy seed health. But it is so shocking to me that we just don't think that starting a family is such a big deal and that support isn't a bigger deal. So that is definitely surprising.
I mean, it's interesting we're having this conversation, obviously, with the Ellevate podcast because, on so many levels, right? So talking about women and women's health, maternal health is relevant to our community of women in the workplace. Starting and scaling businesses, very relevant to our community. The experience of doing that as a woman of color, also incredibly relevant and something we need to talk more about. And then more broadly, it's this idea which I'm formulating, so bear with me, around just like societal's expectations of women in our bodies, right? And so we are in the workplace and we're being looked at as like, oh, is she going to have a baby? Or we may choose that we want to start a family or grow our family, and yet we don't have access to paid leave. Or having a child might hinder our career growth, and we don't have access to strong enough healthcare services and financial and insurance. I mean, my out of pocket when I had my third child was like outrageous. And so it's like again and again and again, society lets us down, and yet we have a society that's like, please keep growing the population, have a baby, you should do that. And it's magic, and it's you're creating a human life, but yet there's so much of confusing and misaligned expectations placed on women in our bodies, and yet so little support around that.
So little. I mean, that was, I think, a very well formulated thought here because not only is there so little support, but we know this, right? Like we see what has happened during the pandemic, which is still ongoing, the amount of women who have left the workplace because there is no support for them and for their family structure. It's just absolutely abysmal. One of the things that I just want to take a moment to recognize because I sometimes it can feel like we are living in a time warp or like another world, right? In 2022 here. And that is, there really aren't good mechanisms in the workplace to support someone and their family structure or support a woman who has gone through a pregnancy loss because there truly is not one, not a good playbook out there, and two, we are not trained. We don't know how to support people, right? And so, one of the interesting things is last year, we're very good at creating these guides. And in October of last year, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, we actually decided to focus and to double down the narrative to support people in the workplace who have experienced pregnancy loss. So really three parts, right? Someone who has experienced pregnancy loss, how to have a conversation with your employer, supporting someone through pregnancy loss. And the last one was a guide for employers to be able to actually support their workforce. We got an overwhelmingly huge amount of support for doing this, and so many inbounds, so many people getting in touch with us because these are tough conversations to have, right? But switching the lens to exactly what you said, Kristy, we also have this other side of this toxic culture in the workplace where if a woman is of a certain age, or let's just say she's just gotten married, and by the way, I'm also describing the most like traditional ways, that people, function and create these narratives and storylines in the workplace. But as soon as these life events happen, someone is already, eyeing the corner office, or someone is already thinking, oh my goodness, this pregnancy or this potential family is going to be so disruptive to what we do every day. Or, they're thinking, goodness, who am I going to replace her with? Or how is this going to work? Um, and it isn't disruptive. We just don't have the mechanisms. We don't have the ability or the playbook. And so I just say this like very loud and proud now, which is employees are taking back and changing that power dynamic, right? And we should be, because it is that lack of support, recognition, and those abysmal expectations that really start with the people first. And I think changing that power dynamic is so important. But we also know that employers just can't sit back on their on what was working before. There has to be a new way forward. And I think companies like Poppy and so many of us, founders who are out there, are very much thinking about this in such a more holistic way, because you're a mom in the workplace, you're a mom at home, you're a mom when you're going grocery shopping, you're a mom when you're traveling. You are who you are everywhere, and our lives and our support need to reflect that.
That is so well said and so true. And the companies of, that want to succeed and want to thrive and flourish will be ones that, listen to the voice of their employees, that lead the way in these areas, that really see that now is the time to build into the future in a better way. And a human-centered approach for your workforce not only supports them, but will support your company and its success. So, we shouldn't. I agree. Our workforce is coming together and using their voice and creating change from within, and that is powerful and that is amazing. And we need leaders to step up and listen and to take action. I would love to say we might have something on the political spectrum, but it's still 2022. I don't want to hold my breath any longer, but we'll make it happen. We are going to make change happen for all of us. And that's what this is about.
That's right.
Well, Simmone, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was amazing to hear your story. If our listeners want to learn more about Poppy Seed Health, how would they find you?
Yeah. So first thing is that we are available in the Apple App Store. So you can download us there. You can also download us on Android. So that's really important that, we are everywhere that you are. So download the app. That's, for me, I think that's the number one place that you can't find me, but you can, find out more about Poppy and also get the support that you need, or perhaps gift it to someone that you love and care about. You can also follow us on Instagram. We're just at Poppy Seed Health, and on Twitter, the same thing. And I am just at Simmone Taitt on Twitter and on Instagram. So you can find me there.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Simmone. Wonderful to chat with you today. And thanks for all the amazing work you do.
Thanks, Kristy. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. Thank you all for listening to that conversation with Simmone. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And we want to invite you to continue important conversations about your career, about your world, about business and beyond in one of our weekly roundtables. Our upcoming executive roundtable is talking about gaining visibility in a virtual environment. This is incredibly important for executives because our voice matters, and having that visibility internally to create change within your organization and externally to drive the conversation. We want to make sure that that is not hindered in this virtual time. Our rising leaders are talking about DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, and your role as a manager, also very important. Career changers, how to stand in your power in an interview. So yes, let's own your power, get that job. And women seeking confidence, we're talking about accepting what you can't control. So how do we maybe accept what is we can't control, but then go for and change what we can? It's about understanding that nuance and ways we can continue moving forward, especially if maybe we aren't always in control.
Yep. It's going to be great discussions all around. Oh, Kristy, you know what we have been remiss to tell our listeners today? This week is the last week of Ellevate Her Forward. So you've been hearing me talk about it. Ellevate Her Forward is a fellowship granting fund that we created as a response of the COVID-19 pandemic and the millions of women that lost their jobs or got furloughed through that time. To this day, there are still more than 1 million women who have not re-entered the workforce. And we know that there are people who are looking for jobs and trying to get ahead. So what we created is Ellevate Her Forward, where people who have funds and ability can give some of those funds. You can donate anything. Everything makes a difference into this fund, in which we then take that money and use it to grant access to fellows to a whole host of things, including a year of Ellevate membership, which is a community where they can meet other women who can help them, give them introductions, job referrals, help them polish up what they need to do and talk about in their interviews, etc., and just open doors. And also with our partner Skillsoft, we give them access to Precipia, which is Skillsoft online learning platform. So they can also sharpen their skills. This way, we hope to be able to help them get ahead, get back in the workforce, and kick butt. We are doing this. We've done this as a third year, and both applications and contributions close at the end of this week. So please, please, please pass it along. Contribute if you can. And if you're in need, please also apply. You can see all the information at elevateherforward.com. Don't forget, it's just this week, and we still have quite a few fellows that have not been funded. So it would be great if we could support us and support them.
And now we would be remiss if we did not touch on our History Makers series. Maricella, who are the history makers this week?
I feel like we need a drum roll. Tammy Williams will become the first Black woman to own a production studio in the state of Georgia.
Esther Hinton became the first woman to be appointed deputy warden of Putnamville Correctional Facility.
Nicole Lee became the first Asian American woman to serve on the Chicago City Council.
Dakshiani became the first trans woman Panchayat secretary in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu.
Debbie Nash King was sworn in as the first Black woman mayor of Killeen, Texas.
And Marcy Svensson became the first woman to be named state executive director for the Farm Service Agency of North Dakota.
Whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop. All right. Well, we've had quite a conversation today. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. We'll be back here next week with Lizette Ojeda. Lizette is an award-winning psychology and career expert who helps professional women who want to reignite their career and reinvent themselves without sacrificing either one. All right, everyone. We'll see you back here next week.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at ElevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.elevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.